So in Star Ocean 2, there's a character by the name of Gabriel, which is a guy, or Indalecio. And he's like this really mysterious character that really, unless you do a lot of side quests, you really don't really understand who he is. But make a long story short, he's supposed to be the final boss of the game, but you can either do two things. You can either have him be severely weakened, or you can unleash his full power. Now, there's only one form of him, so if you don't fight one form and then the other, you fight him, you just give an option. So anyways, he had a daughter by the name of Philia. Philia happened to have been, obviously his daughter, obviously. And then what ends up happening is he killed her. Well, think of it like this, technically. It was his fault that she got killed, in a way. Gabriel really wasn't a human being. It was like a human being, but he was really under the name. He originally was named Dr. Lantis, Lantis, if I'm not mistaken, Lantis, and Lantis. Anyways, so what ends up happening is Dr. Lantis wanted to conquer the universe in his own way, because the planet he was from a race that was like 4 billion years advanced and all that, or rather at the time they were so advanced, and they ruled over the universe without other planets knowing they existed, and they pretty much didn't let other planets get conquered. So it's essentially like they had the power all across the universe, and they knew like what was out there, but they were dimensional beings from the fourth dimension, so it's like they were smarter than they looked. But at the same time, though, you really didn't, unless you played the game, when you got to them, they really didn't look like they were any different than a human, or like if you want to go to Star Ocean 1, like the Rokians, for example, how that works out. Anyways, so Gabriel is the leader, or rather, he was made the leader, but it's Dr. Lantis. He wasn't possessed. Like, Dr. Lantis put his mind in Gabriel, so Dr. Lantis is still alive, but, he's just under a different body. So, subconsciously, he is Gabriel, but Gabriel is not an individual that, had a soul. Aside from Dr. Lantis became Gabriel, but essentially he got so involved with becoming different that it's, he just became a different person. So it's technically still Dr. Lantis, but a more insane version, and more powerful, rather. But let's talk about the 10 wise men. In Japan, they're called the 10 sages, the 10 wise sages, or something like that. But anyways, what ends up happening is the 10 wise men, again, were designed by Dr. Lantis, but what ended up happening was he reprogrammed them, instead of conquering the universe, to destroying it, because he just couldn't deal with the fact that his daughter was dead. But what's really ironic is he ended up bringing his daughter back to life, and at the same time, though, but he made another body for her. So what you see in the game is really more of a replica that he made. It's debatable if her replica body really looked like what she really did, because she was designed as a seal, like not a seal like an actual, like the animal, a seal that lives in the water, but rather like a seal, like your seal powers, like a magical seal, rather. Now, either way, Gabriel, or we'll just call him, I don't know, I was like Dr. Lantis, or rather Indalecio. Sounds like it's Spanish. Indalecio. And anyways, how do you pronounce that? It's Indalecio, if I'm not mistaken. I always want to pronounce it like it's pronounced like Japanese, but I'm not sure what his name in Japanese is. I had to look it up. Anyways, Gabriel is said to be, well, we obviously know he's 4 billion years old, and again, the other 9 wise men follow him, except for Lucifer, who's technically the second highest in command, so he's like the vice president, essentially. But he's not, Lucifer, even though people mention that, they mention, to religion, you had Lucifer, Gabriel, and all these other names, but technically speaking, they were their own people. They were their own creations. They were subhumans. They weren't born like through sex. They were born through like the creation of, like, I mean in the game's coding, again, you know, it was created by Dr. Lantis through science. So what ends up happening is the 10 wise men, including Gabriel, of course. That's what I'm referring to, you know. I mean, obviously, you know. But so Gabriel is said to be, he wanted to destroy the universe. But how would he have destroyed the universe though? How could he do such a thing if, you know, like, it's so big and he's like just like maybe 6 feet tall, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a little bit shorter. Pretty small though, but he's still powerful though, you know, nonetheless. So how does he do it though? Well, what was his idea? Well, there's this thing called the key of annihilation, or some symbol of annihilation. It literally is what the weapon's called. It's cool though, and it will do that. The idea is to scientific theory, and it is possible. This is based off like real science, but the way the game goes about doing it might sound like science fiction, but at the same time, though, maybe not. I'll do the best I can to explain it. So if you were to take energy and apply so much mass to it, but in a way that rather than causing an explosion, or a supernova in this case, or, you know, like these different type of novas, a supernova, because there's a lot of different definitions of it. Like, either way, it's an explosion. Blows up, nebula, you know, and then things get incinerated and damaged, you know, obviously. But this is actually really interesting. Have you ever wondered what an implosion looks like? Like, it's the opposite of an explosion. So rather than energy pushing out, it's pushing itself in. It's like as if the universe tried to turn itself out and morphed itself to another dimension, if that makes sense. Essentially erasing itself, but at the same time, though, not really. So that's what he wanted to do. He was going to create so much mass that the universe would erase itself. But seeing how he said he was from another dimension, there was more universes out there. So it wasn't just the universe that this took place in. Another really interesting point to make about Star Ocean is, if you think about it, in Star Ocean, I'm trying to think if it's 1 or 2. 2, obviously. But the game mentions that Gabriel was also the one who killed his daughter because she betrayed him. So you find out that, and you also find out that Gabriel comes to his senses, like knows who he originally was. So he does remember being Dr. Lantis, but I think what happened, you know, this is what I'm trying to think, and this is what I'm confused on still. This is what I want someone to explain to me. When Dr. Lantis transferred, you can get all this information. I'll leave a link in the description where I got all this, and they pretty much explain it from start to finish, but I'm just kind of explaining it just a little bit better in case you need a little bit more detail. But this is what I need help understanding. Okay, I mean, obviously it's just a game, so you know what, you don't want to give it too much thought. So it could be anything you want it to be. But the one paragraph that always got me was when it said Dr. Lantis sealed away, you know, well, just as he didn't let his plan go unnoticed. You know, before he committed suicide by transferring his mind, his conscious, his soul into Gabriel, what he did was he committed, technically, you know, he transferred his mind in there, and then his body, like, he committed suicide then, because his body was, nothing was controlling it anymore, because the soul was already gone, and, well, it was transported into Gabriel. So what I'm trying to understand here was, I mean, obviously he was transferred into another body, but was Gabriel still technically Dr. Lantis? I mean, yeah, he is still Dr. Lantis, but are we seeing like maybe a different physical form? But is that still the Dr. Lantis, or is it a different human being, or a different, or like, does Gabriel have a soul too? That makes sense. You know, because this is what I want to understand. You know, what about for the same reasons that, and again, not trying to imply religion in the Star Ocean series, but it is possible that there is an afterlife in the Star Ocean series. Just trying to think how they prove that, but, well, then again, you know, there were gods in that series. Yeah, you know. Because, I mean, even now, if you play Star Ocean 1, you know, if you play the English version, I'm sure the Japanese version had some reference. They did mention that, you know, when you fight the final boss of 1, you know, Roderick even states, he's like, I don't think that's for you to decide. Because, you know, not Asmodeus, but the other guy, Rezo, like Rabar or something like that, or like whatever his name was. You know, the guy that, you know, said he wanted to play the role of a god. He says, all I have to do is just, you know, I've already taken the role of it. He's like, I just gotta finish what I started. You know. And it's weird because he's got like that really mysterious Western theme that plays every time he talks. But it's like, you know, if you take that scene, though, it kind of makes sense, though. You know, Roderick was saying that, he's like, I don't think that's for you to decide. Because, you know, he was implying that, that, you know, maybe there isn't, the whole meaning of life is maybe there is creators out there, but it's not just dimensional beings from like the 4th dimension, you know, like maybe even beyond that, you know. How many dimensions does it really go for? But another thing that I really want to know is, if Gabriel is really still, I mean, you know, obviously he died in the game, but could they technically bring him back to life, though, the same way they did with Asmodeus? All they had to do was get a blood sample and just bring him back to life. Well, actually, I think it could. Yeah, they could, because, you know, all they had to do was take his blood. You know, I mean, he was created the same way, through science. But this is what I want to know, though. Is Dr. Lantis and the 7 and the other 9 wise men, including Gabriel, so 11 individuals here, is Gabriel its own individual, or was it still Dr. Lantis, like without him forgetting its own memory? Or was it that Gabriel had its own soul, but when it absorbed the knowledge of Dr. Lantis and the personality, but Gabriel was its own individual? That makes sense. Just like, think of it like Asmodeus. You know, Asmodeus never existed, and neither did Gingivar, how you pronounce his name. You know, when you go and fight him, Star Ocean 1. You can think of it as, like, in Star Ocean, you think of, like, you know, Asmodeus had a conscience. You know, he says that, he's like, I'm being blatantly honest with you. He's like, I sought to seek a refuge on this planet because, you know, he wanted to learn his own origins. He's like, but I wish I could have resided somewhere else, because, you know, everybody wasn't really giving him the thanks that he wanted. You know, he wanted to live his life, and at the same time, yeah, he was a mad scientist, but the only reason he didn't limit himself was because he was trying to find answers. Why was life the way it was? Why is it that all these organisms are different? Like, he was like, you know, he was like a Scientologist, but for he was just trying to figure out why everything was the way it was, but he didn't limit himself with what he did, so he blew things up, and some things, you know, he gained access to things that, you know, he probably shouldn't have. That's why people went out and killed him, because, you know, he was putting other people's lives in danger. That's why, you know, you gotta stop Asmodeus, because, you know, Asmodeus was, you know, that stone element that killed everybody. You know, the Dorn got inflicted with at the beginning of the game. Millie's father got inflicted with it. Pretty much all the Rokians were like going crazy, like, what the hell happened here? Nobody knew what was going on, but eventually found out that Asmodeus, the space-time laboratory, had crash landed into another world, and then they found a portal that goes there, and then you eventually find this place. You go in there, you solve all these puzzles, eventually you find this guy, and then he finds you, and then you fight him. And then you finally figure out why he did what he did, and then you find out there's more to it than that. Star Ocean 2 is the same way. You know, you had, like, all these different characters that were created through science, but they weren't created through sex. They were created through science because, like, you know, like, they had, like, you know, like the same thing a human does, except with superpowers. Gabriel was meant just to be like a final finisher for the universe, because he had like all these awesome powers, and they sealed most of his powers away. But even with sealed powers, I mean, even Lucifer couldn't even beat him. you know. He comes pretty damn close, but I mean, like, as far as the stats go, but I mean, you know, Gabriel would just kick his ass. I mean, he could kill all the 10 wise men all by himself, and that's not even with his limiter on or off. You know, that's saying something right there. But another thing that I want to point out, though, is, I mean, I want to go with the idea that Gabriel remembers who he was, but I want to say that Gabriel was his own individual person. Like, he had his own soul, sort of, or his own conscience and all that. You know, much like another human being would. But it's like, he absorbed the memories of, because, and maybe even had his soul too. Like, maybe he was trapped inside of him, you know. But at the same time, though, it's like, you know, maybe he had two different consciousnesses, and he just absorbed his personality too while he was at it. Because, I mean, you know, why does it matter, though? Because I'm trying to think about it, though. Like, I'm trying to think, like, was Gabriel really not as evil as you think he was? Like, in the sense that he was just becoming a different person and just trying to find answers, like Asmodeus was, but at the same time, though, you know, being that, because again, think about it, you know, Gabriel was nothing more than just a biological machine. I mean, it's not a machine, but it's like, you know, with superpowers and stuff, so a superhuman, essentially, or a human-like race. And, I'm trying to think what else you want to imply. You know, had living organisms, had a brain, you know, makes sense. And at the same time, though, he was pretty powerful from the fourth dimension. But Dr. Lantis, again, sealed his body away subconsciously, and then, you know, as well as the wise men, and they die. Well, then, in what was called in eternity space. But he found a way out, and so did the other wise men while they were at it. So Gabriel, being now Dr. Lantis is already dead, because technically committed suicide by transferring his body and sealing them away at the same time. And then you find out that he comes back as Gabriel. So Gabriel is still Dr. Lantis either way, but it's debatable if Gabriel is still, like, physically Dr. Lantis, but in a different body, or if Gabriel just absorbed his memories and became Dr. Lantis, but in his own way, though. Yeah, I know that kind of sounds a little confusing, but... So, either way, I want to believe that, you know, like, his soul was still with him somehow, but, like, in its own way, though, if that makes sense. His own conscience was still with... But, like, Gabriel, like, was pretty much that character, you know what I mean? Or maybe Gabriel wasn't alive yet when he... So, he was, like, if I'm not mistaken, and this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe it is Dr. Lantis, like, in the sense that is still Dr. Lantis alive, but as Gabriel, though. Because, if I'm not mistaken, it does mention that Gabriel was, again, he built the 9 wise men, the first 9, aside from Gabriel. Gabriel was supposed to be its own individual program. But then as he was going through the program and as he was finishing it, if I'm not mistaken, Gabriel wasn't completely finished yet. So what ended up happening was, you know, he finished, like, what, you know, like, the programming for, like, what he was, like, he pretty much had the blueprints already mapped out, what he wanted to do with it. But when came the time that, you know, he was about to finish and sealed him away, but he found out that, you know, his daughter died, and this changed everything. So what he did was he used that as motivation to finish this, but he changed the programming, and then he put his own body in there, his own soul, rather, too. So when he died, he would just carry over to another dimension. Well, he'd carry over to another body. So what ends up happening is Gabriel is now, well, Dr. Lantis is now Gabriel, and maybe Gabriel's, you know, soul really was never really completed yet, or rather individuality wasn't really completed yet. So So we can say that maybe it's Dr. Lantis, but confused and delusional. I have to look. I really got to look this up again. This is really, really interesting. I didn't really think about this until now. But essentially, whatever the case is, whoever Gabriel is, like, you know, whether it's still Dr. Lantis or a different entity that was created by Dr. Lantis that became Dr. Lantis, essentially, but in its own way, though. Or maybe there's two souls still, but none of the other 9 wise men that I know of, they do not become, like, they were created, and the second they were turned on, there is their wills. They were their bodies, their conscious. It was the same one. They were never possessed by anything else, and their souls were never taken out or anything, or conscious, you know, whatever you want to believe. You know, so they were living organisms created with superpowers. So what ends up happening is then you would find out that Gabriel, either, you know, you would fight Gabriel to pretty much stop him, and eventually you do win. So Gabriel gets his ass kicked by a bunch of mortals. I mean, technically he was still a mortal too, but he was just advanced. They just couldn't age, but they understood the whole life cycle of how to live a long time, and they didn't really physically kill each other. And if they did, they could probably bring themselves back to life because they probably knew how. Whether through resurrection spells or whether just understanding how a physical body works, and pretty much the whole idea of how energy works. How to make a whole new human being with the DNA, RNA, whatever you want to, but probably mostly DNA in this case, and then turn it into something else completely different. A physical body made of flesh, bones, blood, cells, material, and then of course throw some magic in there too, because of its own abilities. And essentially, Gabriel was made the leader after the 10 wise men, while the other 9 wise men were dead, because they just could not compute with each other. So they all outweighed each other in their own personalities, but Gabriel could have beat them all. And that's the only reason why Gabriel wanted to destroy the universe, was because his daughter died. And his daughter didn't want to implode the entire universe. I mean, that just doesn't sound right at all, does it? So that pretty much explains it for you. You know, Gabriel is probably one of the best villains in the entire series, and definitely one of the most interesting video game characters you could ever encounter. So hopefully this explains some stuff, or kind of enlightens some stuff, rather. So comment, rate, subscribe, favorite, share this video. If you have any questions, have any requests, let me know.